This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Kathryn, Robert, and I are talking about pacing. Pacing is a friend we haven't visited in a while. That's right, Kathryn. Well, I wasn't going to make you. I was just laughing. So, before the call, Kathryn said, "Don't call on me. I might draw up a blank," so I'm teasing. But she did have a good joke. I say you go for it.
Okay, pacing. Isn't that when I slow down my typing speed? Or speed it up?
I think so, yes. Yes, it's all about word count, isn't it? When you have fewer... Right? Right, yes. When you have fewer words on a page, readers turn the page faster, and that makes it a fast-paced novel, right? That's a beach read.
No.
Yeah, lots of short paragraphs, very choppy sentences, quick, punchy dialogue. That's a fast-paced novel.
Well, it could be. Or it could not be.
Well, or it could be a quick read, but not necessarily a fast-paced novel. So what is the difference? What makes a story well-paced? Because we've just established it's not word count, it's not sentence length, it's not how quickly you get to the end of a page.
When you can't wait to find out what happens next.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think pacing is really... One key aspect of it is that can't put it down feeling. That's the way a well-paced story affects the reader. But it's also at another level the ebb and flow of action and of emotional intensity. You know, if you've got a really peak moment in your dramatic action, and that could be physical action, or it could be physically a very quiet moment, but emotionally intense action, it's nice to follow that with sort of a down beat or rest, to borrow from music there, so that the reader gets to breathe and the characters get to breathe and you get to absorb what just happened before continuing up the story's arc, you know? So that's key. Mm-hmm.
Yes, because the relentless action can actually leave you as a reader quite tired, quite weary. You sometimes need time to stop and just digest what just happened. And the last thing you want to do as a writer is force the reader to go back and reread it so they can comprehend, so that they can take it in at a slower pace. And I've definitely fallen into that mistake early on because I like fast-paced action-type stories. I fell into the trap of thinking it's just got to be thing after thing after thing after thing. And one of my early beta readers, when I was writing my first book, said, "There's a lot that just keeps happening."
Yeah.
And she didn't have the technical understanding that the professional editor like Alida would, of being able to tell you why that's the case. But just knowing that you think, oh, okay, right, I need to somehow, make this, as you say, ebb and flow a bit. I think is it Stein who has a particular formula for that I found helpful at a particular time in my writing career, where you start with the goal, conflict, disaster as your scene type A, and then scene type B is the reflection, remotivation, dilemma, and decision. I can't remember what his technical terms for it are, but I found that helpful. If you've got a scene that's not working, or if you've got too many action scenes together, it is helpful to say, okay, well, have I written in or alluded to even the reaction of the characters to that? Because I've read books where people have been shot and then you wouldn't. It's like they're fine the next
time.
Yes. Battling on with a gunshot wound and apparently not reacting to it. Okay, fine, whatever.
Right, right. And that's a continuity issue, which also can factor into the pacing of your story and lose plausibility. And then your reader stops believing in your characters and in you as a writer because you've just, broken the continuity, broken the bounds of normal expectations, unless you establish that your character is some kind of superhero, has some kind of super ability that makes that plausible. You break the contract with the reader. But, another layer to the pacing thing is interiority and exteriority. So if you've got an action scene where a lot of physical stuff is happening, you said your reader told you a lot of things just keep happening, and that made me think of this, Robert. It can create sort of that boom, 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 boom feeling of piling one thing on top of another, of a very physical kind of escalation. And it's all external to the character, it's physical happenings. And at some point, you want to go into your point of view character. You want the interior moment and that bit of reflection or that bit of backstory that comes up in memory or that thought to the person left behind at home. All of those elements can create the flow that you need to make a smooth pace, to keep the pace engaging as we draw the reader through that story.
Right, because you want a constant up and down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think as you guys are speaking about this, sometimes I think pacing gets smashed onto, like you were talking about, Alida, as an author, I need to break this up in a way that makes it fast paced. But it feels more like we're talking about almost as the character would experience it, right? Mm-hmm. So the pacing is more like how they are experiencing what is happening in the story, whether it's a reflective, more slow, more interior moment versus something that is just one thing after another that they're dealing with and having thrown at them, which I think for me is a little more helpful in terms of how I'm looking at pacing, right? Not as an exterior thing I'm doing to my story, but something that is woven into the experience of the character itself.
Right. It should be organic to your character's experience and the story you're telling. You might have a very character-driven, reflective, prose-centered, lyrical story that you would say has a slow pace in terms of dramatic action or escalation. But if it's well-paced, it's going to be equally enjoyable and equally engaging to a reader, and because that's right. It's like the difference between sitting on a raft and being gently carried down a river on a lovely sunny day versus whitewater rafting, right?
Right.
Both can be equally good and equally fun and enjoyable to the reader, but they're very different experiences. So when we talk about pacing, it's a mistake to think it's all about rising action and events happening quickly or suddenly. It's not. It's about doing what is best for the specific story that you're telling.
Right. Because if you have the reader that wants to go on the whitewater rafting adventure, it would be really bad to stick them on a raft floating down a lazy river, right? So
right, and vice versa.
The advice that's generally given, and I think it was probably most recently with my story grid experience, but saying that that the most important skill probably any writer can have is to know how to make a scene work, so that it incites well, it moves well, it has momentum, and it has some kind of climactic crisis that makes sense to the overall story arc. I think if you can do that, then the choice of how you break that up for the reading experience on the page still works, because your scene works pacing wise. So I think that's as opposed to doing it the other way around, which is, okay, I've got this bit of story, how can I divide it up so it's more exciting for the reader? That's not the point. It should have been exciting in the first place. And while you were metaphorically going down the river there, I was thinking about making food. It doesn't matter how small you divvy it all up and serve it in these elegant little trays. If you've made a really boring meal, it's still a really boring meal, no matter how small your bite sizes are. But if you've made this beautiful degustation and you've served it all in those different, then it doesn't matter. We can eat it all at once. We can eat it bit by bit. It's still going to be enjoyable. So I agree. I think that you want to helicopter back to, okay, is the pace inherent, and is the inherent pace right for my genre, the story I want to tell, what I'm hoping the reader will experience, as opposed to just thinking, okay, I need a chapter break here because it's going to make them turn to the next chapter. I mean, yes, you do want that, but that's the last thing you do.
Right.
And that's maybe less pacing and more just external structure of your book, right? Does that make sense?
Right.
It's not the story's pacing. No. It's something you contrive to help your commercial attraction. Through whatever. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Sometimes I have writers ask me how many pages their chapters should be, and it's like, well, totally depends on your story, on your style, on all of these other factors. But my answer is to write your chapters the way you write them, and then look, and you're going to find an average. Like maybe my novels, I like 7 to 10 page chapters. That just kind of works for my narrative style. But then I'm going to break the pattern every so often. So I might have a chapter that is 3 paragraphs long because it's this one key moment that is spotlighted, and it makes sense to have chapter breaks, keeping it distinct from the action before and the action that comes after. And maybe there's a chapter that ends up stretching to 15 or 16 pages because that's what's organic to that movement in the story. And this is where, we can make a parallel between the physical structure to the emotional pace, the river versus the whitewater rapids there. You need to do what's organic, and you don't want the reader to feel like they're trapped with a metronome in the room, right? The pace should ebb and flow. It should be quicker here and slower there, depending on the moment within the movement within the story, just like rivers go around beds and bends. Boy, wow, I'm mixing up words tonight. Rivers have bends, they have changes in gradient, they have, riffles and rapids and log jams, and things change. So even though you might be on the same river on the same day, your experience of it will change as you traverse that river.
Well, yeah, it's art, right? We want to have those emotional moments, those rises and falls, right? So, I mean, you can see this in almost any kind of art. Just go listen to some really great classical music. Doesn't even have to be really great classical music. Just go listen to music, classical music, and just listen to the story that's being told through the dynamics, through the expression. Go look at some awesome art, like visual art, and just enjoy. Like all of that is it's designed to have that, your eye is drawn here, and then it's drawn down here, and then it moves over here, and you sit in certain places because that's the story that's being told, right? So we just get we're telling an actual story in words, right? But that's the same thing. You want to have those emotional ups and downs, and like you said before, the rests and the moments of quiet before you have the moments of big. So yeah, have all the differences.
We talked about maybe it was last week or the week before about I think I was talking about this whole idea of a steady state being something that human beings don't adapt to terribly well. And I think some of that is I think the guys who are experts on perception say that we are trained to perceive by difference. Because it keeps us safe, obviously helps us survive. So when something different happens dramatically, we notice it, but we don't notice sameness. And that's obviously one of the driving forces behind pacing, because we feel the difference, we notice it. Whereas if it's same, and then it can make a story feel boring, even if it's action-packed. If it's a car chase followed by another car chase, followed by another car chase, followed by another car chase. After a while, we get that the next chapter is going to be a car chase.
Yes.
And so that predictability. Whereas I think the fact that we innately tend to perceive a difference helps us understand why creating different scenes, rising, falling, makes it very appealing for a human to read, because it's what we sought for, it's what we track for.
If you're listening to this podcast, you are probably a writer, and you've maybe heard me talk about the Storyworks reading series. It is the new branch in the Storyworks family tree. It is a literary journal podcast. That's right, a hybrid, a literary journal for your ears, with a print anthology at the end of the year of the best of the podcast. I am open for submissions, and I want to see your best prose right now. I am taking both fiction and creative nonfiction. You can read the guidelines and submit your work at storyworkspodcast.com/submit. What are you waiting for? It's time to see your stories published and sit on the other side of this microphone from me. Have a conversation about your storycraft.
And I was thinking when you were talking as well that one piece of advice I had was try to vary up your characters. If it's always just two characters in a room, it takes a very skilled author to pull that off. The same as if it's just a one-person play or a two-person play and no change in setting. Very, very talented people to pull that off. And for most of us, varying settings, the number of people on stage, will help the general background sense of pacing. Obviously, the pace comes from the story plot and action points, but also learning not to always set them in the same spot all the time will help you in the long run. Doesn't mean you have to do that. Like I say, if you're a very experienced writer, you might well be able to have two people in a room for the entire story.
Right. Well, and if people are interested in exploring those possibilities, go read some plays, because plays are designed to be limited in setting. You have a certain amount of space to build one set, and unless they go really minimalist or experimental and are leaving a lot to imagination, to lighting cues, to things like that, you end up with very simple spaces that the characters can inhabit. So you read those plays, you're going to see how very few people in a very limited space can carry dramatic tension forward and create a compelling story. But that being said, you're right, Robert, that changing the setting will also influence the pace. And if you don't change your setting, you can change the seasons. You can, change the window dressing. Sometimes writers are so focused on what the characters are saying and doing that they forget about the world around them. And then suddenly as a reader, you're like, wait a minute, was that last chapter 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago? Shouldn't the leaves be off the trees, or shouldn't the cactus be blooming, or shouldn't, And on a slightly broader level as well, if you're looking at your story's outline, if you're using the same conflict again, but it hasn't escalated in any way, then that's also another part of sameness that can affect your reader's sense of pace. Oh, here we go again. They're having another argument, and it's the same argument as before. Or even though it wasn't car chase after car chase after car chase, there were two car chases, and they both had the same result, where the hero, spun off the road and got hurt. It doesn't feel different enough. So the difference aspect of your story, I think, you do have to think about that when you're either plotting or doing revisions. Right.
Is this different enough to the last scene that it feels like there's progression?
Yes.
Because that can affect pace, and many other things, of course, but can affect pace.
Right. Redundancy in story is a huge issue that I see a lot
I knew he had a
of.
simple way to it. Redundancy. I should have said, Alida, talk about redundancy.
There you go. Yes, I mean, so strategic repetition is one thing. I'm not talking about strategically repeating a behavior or an element of your story, but when you do as Robert was just describing and repeat the same elements, it creates a redundancy, and that will bore a reader. You never want the reader to be pulled out of the story in the first place, but then to be pulled out of the story to think, I've seen this before. We're revisiting something. I already know this. Then your reader's losing faith in your ability as a storyteller because you aren't creating escalation, because you aren't pulling us forward along an arc.
There's that, and that's your opportunity to innovate as well, I think. There's that famous Indiana Jones scene where he's facing the guy in the market and the guy pulls out the knife and everyone's expecting Indiana Jones to get his whip out or his knife or go into some fisticuffs thing, and he just pulls out his gun and shoots him.
Yes.
And it's completely unexpected, but it just, you both laugh, even though it's a terrible act. You laugh and all of a sudden the pace is picked up in a different way. So it's a repeated scene, but something is innovated in it that makes it a different scene. So, it's definitely an opportunity to innovate.
Right. Surprise is a fantastic element. Yeah. Anytime you can surprise your reader, you get bonus points. It's just...
I like to surprise my readers, but I always bring God in at the end and they solve the story.
Oh.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, is that Deus Ex Machina thing?
It's a fantastic writer toolkit thing. Don't do
right.
it, folks.
The sarcasm is real.
I think it's been talking too much today already.
Getting to the slap happy point.
But sorry, I didn't mean to trivialize your surprise element, though. I think that you part of the reason why we read, I think, is to be vicariously surprised, and sometimes that surprise can be, oh wow, I never thought about something like that, and and it happens to you 3 days after you finish a novel, and you go, whew, this has really left me. This has really made a difference to how I think, and that's an extraordinary. When a work of art can change the way somebody else perceives life, that is when you know that you've had this confidence of story, of pacing, of character, of meaning, of theme, even, all perfectly positioned. And certainly for me, I don't strive for my books to change people, but I would wish for them to be impactful, that even if it's just as entertainment impactful, you don't want them to put it down and go, okay, well, that was okay. That's your popcorn pacing, so the sort of pacing we're talking about is the pacing that, as you say, grabs a reader and, won't let them go. And surprise, I think, is a big part of that.
Yeah, surprises. And it can come through humor like Indiana Jones. It can come through a twist, a surprising reveal. I know we had an episode where we talked about Gone Girl a fair amount. And, the twist comes in the middle of that book when you realize the female POV character is not actually dead. Sorry, spoiler. No alert. What are other ways?
The other main characters as much of an a-hole as well, and then you've got two a-holes.
Right.
When you think, what is this book?
Yeah. What are other ways you can surprise your reader? We're veering away from pacing here, but I think this is a great subtopic.
Well, but it's an essential part of making the reader want to know what happens next, because, oh my goodness, okay, that's so, and a surprise that it has to make sense. You have to be able to backfill it and say, now I understand why they did what they did or whatever. So
I like those surprises, the surprise of character, like, oh, that's who you really are, or like that revelation that they're actually more than just the whatever you typecast them as, or maybe they have typecast themselves. I always like that when a character reveals a greater depth than you thought as a reader that they had.
Right.
Especially if they're the antagonist.
Yeah.
And oh,
Yes.
This is getting interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Right.
Yes, and I think it's surprising when characters make choices that the readers wouldn't make, choices that are exceptional, and they have to be grounded in the story and grounded in who this character is as a person. It can't be a surprising choice in the sense of being unbelievable, where the reader's saying, no way, he wouldn't do that right now. That's crazy or foolish, or I just don't believe that would be his motivator, because it hasn't been established. You do have to do all the groundwork to lead up to that choice. But when the character makes a choice that might ordinarily be inconceivable, then the reader gets to explore a surprising avenue in life through this story, right? And that can be a different kind of surprise that really shapes the arc and therefore the pacing.
Right, and that's a really, this is a whole podcast topic in itself, but the predictability, I think, if you're reading a story and it becomes predictable, then no amount of effort of pacing by the writer is going to rescue that. So we want a fine balance between predictability in the sense that this is the type of story I want to read, and unpredictability in the sense that I still don't know what's going to happen. Even though it's a romance and I know there's going to be a happily ever after, I still don't know how they're going to do that. So there's a sense of both wanting to know but not wanting to know that is a really fine line. The two silly surprises don't work. No surprises at all don't work. Somewhere along the line, you've got to get some things in there that glue the reader to something new. And I think that's where this, be surprising but inevitable. That's this is coming, but you don't know how it's going to arise, and then something comes out of the blue, like information about the antagonist, or now I can see the pieces starting to come together. Those are the books we love, aren't they?
Right.
Well, and that's where I feel like the pacing can really shine, because then you can start feeling like you're racing toward that end, like man, I just can't wait. And it's not necessarily how fast you're turning the pages, but as much as like just
And that's when I wish the book was 100 pages longer, because I never want to finish
exactly.
it. And then it's so sad when you finish it. Oh no, I'm never going to have that experience ever again.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. We've touched on a lot of different elements of pacing, and I think at the end of the day, a well-paced story is set at a pace that keeps the reader engaged, emotionally engaged, intellectually engaged with excitement, engaged with a drive to keep reading. And it's not about fast or slow, high or low.
Definitely.
Or short sentences.
He said.
Damn.
Are you ready to take your storycraft to the next level? StoryWorks Fiction Online School has courses available right now, from micro courses on character traits to master level workshops on plot and building characters. There are also live workshops with your instructor in the classroom with you every week, guiding your progress and workshopping your manuscripts along the way. All students enrolled in StoryWorks Fiction, whether active in a class or not, can take advantage of the monthly free live Q&A calls with Alida. Check out storyworksfiction.com today and take your storycraft to the next level. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.